In the quiet coastal town of Pinewood, Maine, during the warm, hazy summer of 2001, 17-year-old Lisa Wilson vanished without a trace. A recent high school graduate, Lisa had spent her teenage years immersed in dreams of becoming an ecologist, her heart set on studying the sprawling forests of New England. Her disappearance sent shockwaves through the close-knit community, where the rhythmic crash of Atlantic waves and the scent of pine were as familiar as the faces of neighbors. Pinewood, with its quaint main street lined with shingled storefronts, a historic lighthouse perched on a rocky bluff, and dense forest stretching toward the horizon, had always felt like a haven. Yet, on that fateful June evening, the town's sense of safety unraveled. Lisa had attended a graduation party at Lake Serenity, a serene body of water nestled in a clearing surrounded by towering pines. The party, hosted by a classmate's family, was a celebration of newfound freedom, with music drifting through the warm air and bonfires casting flickering shadows on the water's edge. Lisa, known for her quiet confidence and infectious laugh, had been in high spirits, her auburn hair catching the firelight as she mingled with friends. She wore her favorite denim jacket, adorned with embroidered flowers, and a silver bracelet engraved with her initials, a gift from her parents for her 16th birthday. Witnesses recalled her dancing near the lake, her silhouette blending into the twilight as fireflies began to speckle the air. She had promised her parents, Thomas and Clara Wilson, that she would be home by midnight. When the clock struck 1 and Lisa had not returned, Thomas, a burly mechanic with calloused hands from years at Pinewood's only auto shop, felt the first stirrings of unease. Clara, a soft-spoken schoolteacher who taught English at Pinewood Middle School, called Lisa's cell phone, but it went straight to voicemail. The couple drove to the lake, their old pickup truck rattling along the gravel road. The party had dwindled, with only a few stragglers lingering around the dying embers of the bonfire. Lisa's friends, bleary-eyed from the night's festivities, swore she had left around 11:30 p.m., intending to walk the short distance home along the familiar path that wound through the pines. The path, lined with wildflowers and shaded by ancient trees, was one Lisa had taken countless times, often sketching the flora in her notebook during solitary walks. Thomas and Clara searched the trail, their flashlights cutting through the fog that rolled in from the coast, but found no sign of their daughter, no jacket, no bracelet, no trace of her presence. The Pinewood Police Department mobilized quickly, their resources limited but their determination fierce. Officers combed the lake's perimeter, their boots sinking into the soft earth as they searched for footprints or discarded items. Divers scoured the lake's depths, though its clear waters revealed nothing but pebbles and driftwood. Search parties, made up of townsfolk and volunteers, fanned out into the forest, calling Lisa's name until their voices grew hoarse. Helicopters buzzed overhead, their spotlights illuminating the canopy, while dogs sniffed along the trail, their handlers hopeful for a scent. Yet, despite the exhaustive efforts, no evidence surfaced. No torn clothing, no dropped belongings, no witnesses who saw Lisa after she left the party. The lake, the forest, and the town itself seemed to have swallowed her whole. Lisa's bedroom, on the second floor of the Wilsons' modest clapboard house, remained untouched, a shrine to her absence. The walls were adorned with posters of New England forests, their vibrant greens a testament to her love for nature. Her desk, cluttered with books on botany and ecology, held a well-worn copy of Wuthering Heights, her favorite novel, its margins filled with her neat handwriting. A spiral-bound notebook lay open, its pages covered in delicate sketches of wildflowers, columbines, trilliums, and ladies' slippers, each labeled with scientific precision. Her bed was neatly made, a quilt stitched by Clara draped over it, and her closet held clothes that still carried the faint scent of her lavender perfume. A small terrarium on the windowsill housed a collection of mosses and ferns, a miniature forest she tended with care. Her younger sister, Sophia, only 12 at the time, would sneak into the room at night, curling up on Lisa's bed as if proximity to her sister's things could summon her back. Thomas and Clara clung to every shred of hope, their lives consumed by the search. Thomas spent his evenings driving the back roads, his eyes scanning the ditches and tree lines for any sign of Lisa. Clara organized community vigils, her hands trembling as she lit candles in the town square, where neighbors gathered to pray and share memories. Sophia, quiet and withdrawn, stopped speaking for weeks, her grief manifesting in long silences and tearful nights. The police interviewed Lisa's classmates, teachers, and even casual acquaintances, piecing together her final hours. Her best friend, Caitlin Morris, tearfully recounted Lisa's excitement about her acceptance to the University of Vermont, where she planned to study environmental science. Others described her as kind but reserved, more at home in the woods than in crowded hallways. Yet, no one could explain why she vanished or where she might have gone. As summer faded into fall, the search efforts waned. The police, lacking leads, shifted their focus to other cases, though they assured the Wilsons they would follow any new tips. Flyers with Lisa's photo, a candid shot of her smiling by the lake, her hair wind-tossed, faded on telephone poles, their edges curling in the rain. The town, once united in its mission, returned to its routines, though a pall of unease lingered. Rumors swirled. Some whispered of a runaway, others of foul play, but no theory held weight without evidence. For Thomas and Clara, the absence of answers was a wound that refused to heal. They kept Lisa's room intact, unable to pack away her belongings, as if doing so would mean admitting she was gone forever. Months stretched into years, each passing season deepening their sorrow, leaving the Wilson family suspended in a painful limbo, haunted by the mystery of Lisa's disappearance. 20 years had passed since Lisa Wilson's disappearance, and in the autumn of 2021, Thomas Wilson stood in the doorway of her bedroom, steeling himself for a task he had long avoided. The weight of 2 decades had etched lines into his face, his once dark hair now streaked with gray, and the strain of unrelenting grief had frayed his marriage to Clara. Their home, once filled with the warmth of family, had grown quiet, the laughter of their daughters replaced by the hum of routine and the unspoken ache of loss. Clara, whose gentle patience had anchored their family, had suggested it was time to let go, to pack away Lisa's belongings and reclaim the space that had stood frozen in time. Thomas, though reluctant, agreed, driven by a need to ease the tension that had settled between them. He stepped into the room, the air heavy with dust and memory, and began the slow, painful process of sorting through Lisa's possessions. The room, bathed in the soft light of an overcast afternoon, felt like a museum of a life interrupted. The posters of New England forests still clung to the walls, their colors faded but vibrant in memory. Lisa's desk, a sturdy oak piece Thomas had built for her 13th birthday, bore the weight of her passions: stacks of botany textbooks, a field guide to wildflowers, and a notebook filled with her meticulous sketches. Her bed, neatly made, held the quilt Clara had sewn, its patchwork of greens and blues a nod to Lisa's love for the natural world. The terrarium on the windowsill, once a thriving ecosystem of mosses and ferns, had long since withered, its glass clouded with neglect. Thomas moved carefully, as if disturbing the space might erase the last traces of his daughter. He folded her clothes, jeans embroidered with daisies, a sweater she wore on chilly hikes, and placed them in boxes, each item a tether to moments he could scarcely bear to recall. As he worked, Thomas's hands brushed against a hardcover book tucked beneath a pile of notebooks on the desk. It was Lisa's high school yearbook from 2001, its navy blue cover embossed with the Pinewood High logo. A pine tree silhouetted against a crescent moon. He had avoided this book for years, unable to face the frozen smiles of a graduating class that had moved on while Lisa remained lost. His fingers hesitated, then opened the cover, the pages crackling with age. He flipped through candid photos of football games, prom nights, and classroom moments, each image a reminder of a world Lisa had inhabited. When he reached her senior portrait, his breath caught. Lisa's dark brown eyes gazed out, her soft smile radiating quiet confidence, her auburn hair framing her face. The sight was a knife to his heart, stirring a grief so raw it felt as fresh as the summer she vanished. Next to her portrait, scrawled in Lisa's neat handwriting, was a note addressed to her best friend, Caitlin Morris. The words were lighthearted, teasing Caitlin for borrowing her copy of Wuthering Heights and calling her the keeper of stolen treasures. The note ended with a playful plea to return the book, signed with a tiny heart. Thomas traced the ink with his fingertip, a faint smile breaking through his sorrow. Lisa had loved classic literature, often curling up by the fireplace to read Bronte or Austen, her annotations filling the margins with thoughts on love, nature, and human struggle. The mention of the book stirred a memory. Lisa's collection of novels had been her pride, each one carefully chosen and cherished. The thought that Caitlin might still have this piece of Lisa's life sparked a sudden resolve in Thomas. He needed to reconnect with his daughter's world, to touch something tangible from her past, even if it offered no answers. Thomas closed the yearbook and placed it on the desk, his mind racing. Caitlin had been Lisa's closest confidant, the two inseparable since middle school. They had spent countless afternoons exploring the forests around Pinewood, collecting leaves and pressing flowers into scrapbooks. Caitlin, with her quick wit and infectious energy, had been a constant presence in the Wilson home, her laughter a counterpoint to Lisa's quieter demeanor. Yet, after Lisa's disappearance, Caitlin's visits had dwindled, the weight of shared grief too heavy to bear. Thomas hadn't spoken to her in years, but the note in the yearbook felt like a thread, fragile but unbroken, leading back to his daughter. He searched online and found Caitlin's contact information. She was now a nurse in Bangor, a city about an hour's drive from Pinewood. Her social media showed a life built on steady ground, a modest home, a career helping others, and a quiet strength that reminded Thomas of Lisa. Determined to follow this thread, Thomas called Caitlin and arranged to meet her the following day. He packed the yearbook into a canvas bag, its weight a strange comfort, as if carrying a piece of Lisa with him. As he drove through Pinewood's familiar streets, the town seemed both unchanged and irrevocably altered. The lighthouse still stood sentinel on the bluff, its beam cutting through the fog each night. The main street, with its diner and hardware store, bustled with the same faces, now older, their lives continuing while the Wilsons remained tethered to 2001. Thomas's truck rattled past Lake Serenity, its waters calm under the gray sky, and he felt a pang of guilt for stirring up the past. Yet, the yearbook note had ignited a spark of purpose, a need to understand who Lisa had been in those final days. He didn't expect to find her, not after 20 years, but he hoped to uncover a fragment of her story, a way to keep her memory alive without the crushing weight of unanswered questions. Thomas drove the hour-long journey to Bangor under a sky heavy with October clouds, the yearbook and Lisa's copy of Wuthering Heights resting on the passenger seat of his weathered pickup truck. The road wound through rolling hills and patches of forest, the vibrant reds and golds of autumn foliage a stark contrast to the gray weight of his mission. Bangor, a small city with a mix of historic brick buildings and modern sprawl, felt worlds away from Pinewood's quiet charm. Thomas located Caitlin's address, a tidy duplex on a tree-lined street, its porch adorned with pumpkins and a welcome mat worn from use. Caitlin, now in her late 30s, greeted him at the door, her blonde hair pulled into a loose bun, her eyes carrying the same warmth he remembered from her teenage years, though now tempered with a quiet sorrow. She led him inside, where the scent of brewed tea mingled with the faint antiseptic smell of her nursing scrubs, still draped over a chair from her last shift. The living room was cozy, with bookshelves lining one wall and framed photos of family vacations scattered across a coffee table. Caitlin offered Thomas a seat on a plush sofa, its cushions sinking under his weight, and poured tea into mismatched mugs. She moved with the practiced ease of someone accustomed to caring for others, yet her hands trembled slightly as she set the teapot down, betraying the emotional weight of Thomas's visit. They sat in silence for a moment, the air thick with shared memories of Lisa. Caitlin's gaze drifted to a photo on the mantel, a snapshot of her and Lisa at 16, arms around each other, laughing by Lake Serenity, their faces lit by summer sunlight. Thomas felt a pang, recognizing the denim jacket Lisa wore in the photo, the same one she had on the night she vanished. He opened the yearbook, its pages now familiar, and pointed to the note Lisa had written about Wuthering Heights. Caitlin's expression softened, a mix of guilt and nostalgia crossing her face as she admitted she had kept the book, unable to part with it after Lisa's disappearance. She rose and crossed to a bookshelf, her fingers tracing the spines until she pulled out a worn copy of Wuthering Heights, its cover faded, its pages yellowed at the edges. Lisa's handwriting filled the margins, underlined passages, notes about Heathcliff's passion, and musings on love's destructive power. Thomas took the book, his calloused fingers brushing against the familiar script, each word tethered to his daughter's mind. As he flipped through the pages, a folded piece of paper slipped out, landing on the table. He unfolded it carefully, revealing a note in Lisa's precise handwriting, dated just 5 days before she disappeared. The note was brief, mentioning a plan to meet a classmate, Evan Davis, at the old barn on the outskirts of Pinewood. It described the barn as a quiet place to talk, away from prying eyes, and ended with a cryptic comment about needing to clear things up. Thomas's heart quickened, the name Evan Davis stirring a vague memory of a lanky, brooding boy who had always seemed to linger on the edges of Lisa's social circle. Caitlin watched Thomas read the note, her fingers twisting the hem of her sweater. She hesitated, then shared what she knew about Evan. He had been a loner at Pinewood High, known for his sharp intelligence but also for his temper, which flared in rare but intense outbursts. Lisa, with her gentle curiosity and belief in second chances, had taken an interest in him during their senior year, though she kept it quiet. Caitlin recalled how Lisa would mention Evan in passing, describing late-night walks where he spoke of his troubled home life or his dreams of leaving Pinewood. Caitlin had warned Lisa to be cautious, sensing Evan's intensity, but Lisa brushed it off, insisting he just needed someone to listen. The secrecy of their connection surprised Thomas. Lisa had always been open with her parents, sharing her plans and friendships. The realization that she had hidden this part of her life felt like a betrayal, though he knew it was unfair to think so. Thomas's mind raced as he pieced together fragments of memory. Evan had been a peripheral figure in Pinewood, a boy who worked odd jobs at the hardware store and avoided school dances. His family lived in a rundown house near the edge of town, and rumors of his father's drinking had circulated among the townsfolk. Thomas vaguely recalled seeing Evan at the police station after Lisa's disappearance, one of many classmates questioned, but his quiet demeanor had drawn little attention. The fact that he left Pinewood shortly after graduation only deepened Thomas's curiosity. Caitlin mentioned that she hadn't seen Evan in years, though she'd heard he had settled in Portland, running a small business. She didn't know much else, her life having diverged from the past as she built a new one in Bangor. Determined to follow this lead, Thomas thanked Caitlin and tucked the note back into the book, his hands steady despite the storm of emotions within. He drove back to Pinewood as dusk settled, the headlights of his truck cutting through the gathering fog. The note, with its mention of the old barn, gnawed at him. The barn, a dilapidated structure on the outskirts of town, was a relic of Pinewood's farming past, its weathered boards and sagging roof a haunt for teenagers seeking privacy. Lisa had never mentioned going there, and the thought of her meeting Evan in such an isolated place sent a chill through Thomas. He resolved to find Evan Davis, to ask what he knew about that night and what had drawn Lisa to him. The yearbook and book, now resting in his bag, felt heavier, as if they carried not just Lisa's words but the weight of secrets she had kept. As Pinewood's lighthouse came into view, its beams sweeping across the darkening sky, Thomas felt a flicker of purpose, a determination to uncover the truth about his daughter's final days, no matter how painful it might be. Thomas sat in his truck outside Caitlin's duplex, the engine idling as he scrolled through his phone, searching for any trace of Evan Davis. The yearbook and Lisa's copy of Wuthering Heights, with its tucked-away note, lay on the seat beside him, their presence a quiet urging to press forward. Using a combination of faded contacts listed in the yearbook's back pages and a quick internet search, he discovered Evan lived in Portland, Maine, where he ran a small woodworking shop called Davis Crafts. The address was a 40-minute drive from Bangor, and Thomas, fueled by a mix of determination and unease, set out the next morning, the October sky a patchwork of gray clouds threatening rain. Portland's bustling streets, lined with artisanal cafes and historic brick warehouses, felt foreign compared to Pinewood's sleepy rhythm, but Thomas navigated them with purpose, clutching the yearbook in a canvas bag slung over his shoulder. Evan's shop was tucked in an industrial corner of the city, a squat building with a weathered sign above the door. The air inside carried the sharp scent of sawdust and varnish, and the space was cluttered with half-finished furniture, tables with intricately carved legs, chairs awaiting sanding, and shelves stacked with raw lumber. Evan, now in his early 40s, stood behind a workbench, his flannel shirt rolled up to reveal forearms marked with old scars. His hair, once a shaggy black, was cropped short and flecked with silver, and his eyes, a pale blue, carried a weariness that hardened when Thomas introduced himself as Lisa's father. Evan's movements grew stiff, his hands pausing over a piece of oak as he claimed to barely remember Lisa, describing their interactions as fleeting moments in high school hallways. His voice was steady, but his quick glances toward the door and the way he gripped his tools betrayed a nervous energy that set Thomas on edge. The conversation was brief, Evan offering little beyond vague recollections, and Thomas left the shop with a growing conviction that Evan was hiding something. As dusk fell, Thomas lingered in his truck across the street, watching the shop's lights flicker off. Evan emerged, locking the door, and climbed into a battered green pickup. On impulse, Thomas followed, keeping a careful distance as Evan drove out of Portland, the city giving way to winding roads flanked by dense forest. The sky darkened, a light drizzle misting the windshield, and Thomas's heart pounded as he trailed Evan's taillights. After 20 minutes, Evan turned onto a narrow dirt road that led to a secluded clearing where a dilapidated cabin stood, its sagging roof and peeling paint barely visible in the fading light. Thomas parked his truck behind a cluster of pines, hidden from view, and watched as Evan stepped out, carrying a flashlight and a small wooden box, no larger than a shoebox, its surface polished to a dull sheen. Evan moved with purpose, his steps deliberate as he approached an ancient maple tree, its gnarled roots twisting into the earth. Under the cover of night, Evan knelt beside the tree, his flashlight casting a narrow beam as he began to dig. The sound of the shovel biting into the soil was muffled by the drizzle and the rustle of leaves, but Thomas, crouched behind a thicket, could see the careful precision of Evan's movements. The act felt ritualistic, almost reverent, as if Evan were performing a task he had rehearsed many times. He placed the box into the shallow hole, covered it with earth, and patted the soil flat, blending it with the surrounding ground. Thomas's breath caught, his mind racing with questions. Why would Evan bury a box in such a remote place? What connection did it have to Lisa? The image of her note, mentioning a meeting at the old barn, flashed in his mind, and the possibility that Evan held answers to her fate tightened his chest with a mix of dread and resolve. Evan stood, brushing dirt from his hands, and scanned the forest, his flashlight sweeping the shadows. Thomas pressed himself lower, the damp earth soaking through his jeans, his pulse loud in his ears. Satisfied he was alone, Evan returned to his truck and drove away, the red glow of his taillights swallowed by the darkness. Thomas waited, counting the minutes to ensure Evan was gone, then crept toward the maple tree. The freshly turned soil was soft under his boots, a stark contrast to the packed earth around it. He hesitated, the weight of what he might uncover pressing against him, but the need to know drove him forward. He returned to his truck for a small hand shovel he kept in the toolbox, its blade rusted but sharp enough for the task. Kneeling by the tree, he began to dig, the drizzle mixing with sweat on his brow. The act felt like a violation, yet the thought of Lisa's note, her secret meetings with Evan, propelled him onward. The box was shallowly buried, and within minutes, Thomas's shovel struck its wooden surface. He lifted it carefully, its weight heavier than expected, as if it carried more than its contents. He sat back on his heels, the flashlight trembling in his hand as he considered opening it then and there. But the isolation of the forest, the darkness pressing in, and the uncertainty of what he might find convinced him to wait. He tucked the box into his bag, alongside the yearbook and book, and covered the hole, smoothing the soil to hide his presence. Driving back to Pinewood, the box on the seat beside him felt like a silent passenger, its secrets locked within. The image of Evan's careful burial replayed in his mind, each detail sharpening his suspicion. He knew he couldn't confront Evan without knowing what the box held, but the thought of its contents, possibly tied to Lisa's final days, filled him with a dread he could not shake. Thomas resolved to return home, to examine the box in the safety of his own space, determined to uncover whatever truth it held about his daughter's disappearance. Thomas drove back to the secluded cabin under the cover of a moonless night, the wooden box from Evan's burial site tucked securely in his bag, its weight a constant reminder of the secrets it might hold. The forest road was shrouded in darkness, the only light coming from his truck's headlights slicing through the mist that curled among the pines. He parked a short distance from the cabin, his breath shallow as he gripped a small shovel and flashlight, their handles cold against his palms. The forest was silent, save for the faint rustle of leaves and the distant hoot of an owl, its call echoing like a warning. Thomas moved cautiously, his boots sinking into the damp earth as he retraced his steps to the ancient maple tree where Evan had buried the box. The spot was undisturbed, the soil still soft from Evan's earlier efforts, but Thomas's heart pounded with a mix of dread and determination. He knelt beside the tree, the flashlight's beam trembling as it illuminated the ground, and began to dig deeper, driven by an instinct that something more lay hidden beneath. The shovel bit into the earth, each scoop revealing roots and rocks until, several feet down, it struck something solid. Thomas paused, his pulse racing, and carefully cleared the soil to reveal a patch of discolored fabric, partially decomposed and tangled with roots. His hand shook as he brushed away more dirt, exposing what appeared to be a tattered piece of clothing, a denim jacket, its embroidered flowers faded but unmistakable. It was Lisa's, the one she had worn the night she vanished. The sight stole his breath, a wave of nausea rising as he realized the implications. He forced himself to continue, digging wider and deeper, until the flashlight's beam caught the glint of bone. Human remains, brittle and fragmented, lay scattered in the soil, their presence a brutal confirmation of his worst fears. Thomas sank back, his vision blurring with tears, the shovel slipping from his hands. The forest seemed to close in around him, its silence now oppressive, as the reality of Lisa's fate settled over him like a heavy fog. With trembling hands, Thomas retrieved his phone and called the Pinewood Police Department, his voice steady despite the storm within as he reported the discovery and Evan's connection to the site. He sat by the open pit, the flashlight casting long shadows, unable to leave the remains that he knew, in his heart, belonged to his daughter. The wait felt eternal, the night growing colder as he guarded the site, his mind replaying the contents of the wooden box he had opened earlier at home. Inside, he had found Lisa's silver bracelet, its engraved initials glinting under his kitchen light, alongside a stack of Polaroid photos taken at Lake Serenity. The images showed Lisa smiling, unaware of the camera, her auburn hair catching the sunlight as she stood by the water's edge. There were also letters, written in Lisa's precise hand, their words revealing a hidden relationship with Evan Davis. The letters chronicled months of his intense attention, his declarations of affection laced with a possessiveness that grew more unsettling with each page. Lisa's early letters described Evan's charm, his stories of a troubled childhood that tugged at her empathy, but later ones revealed her growing unease. She wrote of his insistence on meeting in secret, away from friends and family, and her attempts to distance herself as she began dating Jake Lawrence, a kind-hearted classmate who had openly courted her. The final letter, dated the day before her disappearance, was a single page, its tone frantic. Lisa described Evan's persistent calls, his late-night appearances near her house, and her fear that he was following her. She mentioned a planned meeting at the old barn, hoping to confront him and end their connection once and for all. The words, written in haste, ended abruptly, as if Lisa had been interrupted. Thomas had read the letters in a haze, each one a dagger to his heart, revealing a side of his daughter's life he had never known. When the police arrived, their flashing lights pierced the forest darkness, casting an eerie glow over the scene. Officers secured the area, their radios crackling as they coordinated with a forensic team dispatched from Bangor. Thomas stood back, his hands numb from the cold, watching as the team carefully excavated the site. They confirmed the presence of human remains, collecting fragments of bone and the tattered jacket for analysis. A detective, her face grim but professional, approached Thomas, noting the significance of the find and assuring him that the remains would be tested to confirm identity. Thomas nodded, his throat tight, knowing in his bones that it was Lisa. The forensic team worked methodically, bagging soil samples and photographing the site, their movements precise against the chaotic backdrop of Thomas's grief. As dawn broke, painting the sky in hues of pink and gray, the police took Thomas's statement, their questions gentle but probing. He handed over the wooden box, its contents now cataloged as evidence, the bracelet, the photos, and the letters that painted a chilling portrait of Evan's obsession. The detective promised to locate Evan, who was still in Portland, and bring him in for questioning. Thomas drove home as the sun rose, the box no longer in his possession but its contents seared into his memory. The discovery of Lisa's remains shattered the fragile hope he had clung to for 20 years. Yet it also brought a bitter clarity. The questions that had haunted him, where Lisa had gone, what had happened that night, now had answers, however devastating. As he pulled into his driveway in Pinewood, the lighthouse's beam still sweeping the horizon, Thomas felt the weight of truth settle over him, a heavy mantle he would carry as he prepared to face Clara with the news that their daughter had been found, but not in the way they had ever hoped. The arrest of Evan Davis sent ripples through Pinewood, the small town's quiet streets buzzing with shock and sorrow as news of his confession spread. He had lured Lisa to the old barn under the pretense of a final conversation, unable to accept her rejection after months of his obsessive pursuit. In a moment of rage, he had struck her with a rock, ending her life, and buried her body in the forest near the cabin, keeping her silver bracelet and letters as a twisted memento of his fixation. The revelation, after 20 years of mystery, shook the community to its core, rekindling memories of the vibrant girl who had once walked among them. Thomas and Clara Wilson, their hearts heavy with the finality of the truth, resolved to honor their daughter's memory with a farewell that would reflect her spirit. They planned a memorial ceremony at Lake Serenity, the place where Lisa had spent countless hours sketching wildflowers and dreaming of a future dedicated to preserving nature. On a crisp October morning, the sky was a rare, unblemished blue, the autumn sun casting golden light across the lake's glassy surface. Pinewood's residents gathered on the shore, their faces a mix of grief and reverence, united in their shared loss. Thomas and Clara stood at the water's edge, their hands clasped tightly, their daughter's urn cradled between them. The urn, a simple ceramic vessel painted with delicate green vines, held Lisa's ashes, recovered from the forest and released from the earth that had hidden her for so long. Caitlin Morris, Lisa's best friend, stood nearby, her eyes red-rimmed but steady, clutching the worn copy of Wuthering Heights that had sparked Thomas's search. Jake Lawrence, Lisa's high school boyfriend, joined the gathering, his presence a quiet acknowledgement of the love he had once shared with her. Other townsfolk, classmates, teachers, neighbors who had lit candles at vigils years ago formed a semicircle, their footsteps soft on the pebbled shore, their breaths visible in the cool air. The lake stretched before them, its surface reflecting the towering pines and the distant silhouette of Pinewood's lighthouse, a beacon that had guided ships through countless storms but could not guide Lisa home. Thomas and Clara had chosen this spot deliberately, knowing how much Lisa had loved the lake's tranquility, its waters a canvas for her sketches of water lilies and reeds. They had decided against a traditional burial, feeling that Lisa's spirit belonged to the natural world she had cherished. As a gentle breeze stirred the trees, Thomas opened the urn, his hand steady despite the ache in his chest. Together with Clara, he scattered Lisa's ashes across the water, the fine particles catching the sunlight as they drifted, blending with the lake's ripples. The act was both heartbreaking and liberating, a release of the daughter they had held onto through years of uncertainty. Caitlin stepped forward, her fingers tracing the edges of Wuthering Heights, its pages worn from years of being held but never read. She knelt at the water's edge, placing the book gently on the surface, letting it float for a moment before it sank, a final offering to her friend. The gesture mirrored Lisa's love for the lake, a place where she had once pressed flowers between the pages of her novels. The townsfolk, following a quiet cue, tossed white lilies, Lisa's favorite flower, into the water. The blooms drifted outward, their petals stark against the dark water, creating a fleeting garden that seemed to hold Lisa's essence. The sight was a poignant echo of her sketches, which had captured the delicate beauty of nature with such care. Thomas and Clara stood together, their hands still entwined, their grief softened by the closure they had longed for. The lake, shimmering under the morning sun, felt like a fitting resting place for Lisa, its depths a part of the natural world she had dreamed of protecting. Sophia, now a young woman, joined her parents, her presence a quiet strength as she placed a single lily among the others, her fingers lingering on the water's surface. The community lingered, some sharing memories of Lisa's kindness, others simply standing in silence, honoring the girl who had been taken too soon. As the ceremony drew to a close, the group dispersed slowly, their footsteps crunching on the gravel path back to their cars, leaving the Wilsons and Caitlin by the lake. Thomas and Clara returned home as the sun climbed higher, its warmth a faint comfort against the chill of their loss. In their living room, they placed a photograph on the mantel, not the formal yearbook portrait that had haunted Thomas's search, but a candid shot of Lisa taken during a summer at Lake Serenity. In the image, she laughed, her auburn hair tousled by the wind, her face alight with joy as she stood knee-deep in the water, a wildflower tucked behind her ear. The photo captured the essence of who Lisa had been, vibrant, curious, and deeply connected to the world around her. Thomas traced the frame with his finger, a gesture that had become familiar over the weeks of his search, but now it carried a different weight. The mystery of Lisa's disappearance had been solved, her story no longer lost to the shadows. She was part of the lake now, her spirit free in the place she had loved most, her memory preserved in the hearts of those who had gathered to say goodbye.